Hello Ustream world, this is Mike Martin from Casio and we're here for another live clinic on Ustream, and tonight we're going to talk about the XW series, two rather remarkable, very different keyboards that released last year. So looks like we've got a few people online. I have an agenda of a few things that I want to show you guys tonight. Specifically tonight I'm going to focus a little bit more on the XW-G1. It's a little bit neglected over the last year. We've focused a lot of the videos and information on the XW-P1. So there's a couple things I'm going to show tonight that are specific to the G1. However, most of the things we're going to talk about, be it the step sequencer or the solo synth, are in common for both products. So as we go through, there's a chat window for those of you watching live. There's a chat window. Do click that. Ask me questions. Greetings from the UK and greetings from Canada. It's great to have you guys here live to watch the clinic. So I guess I'm going to start out this evening's clinic talking about a little bit of some sound design things with the XW series. The solo synth side of the solo synth, which is in common between both machines, is an incredibly powerful system. I think it's a little underexplored, but now over at Casio Music Forums, we've started posting some more sounds. That's going to be just, we're just scratching the surface at this point, so we're in the process of building a library. We have some contractors that we're working with that are going to make many more sounds for the XWs. So lots of sounds to come. So the solo synth itself, it's a really unique architecture. When you think of a solo synthesizer, you think of products like the Mini Moog, that's certainly famous as being a lead synth. The XW is in some respects a lot more than that. Of course, this is a completely digital synthesizer, but we're taking many of those concepts and expanding upon them with this architecture. So I've got a very basic sound dialed up here, and I'm going to switch over here to this view where you guys can see hopefully a couple of the things that are going on here. I have a basic tone dialed in here. Just called it a basic saw lead. If I dive in, we can see that there are 6 oscillators. I'm going to turn all of them off except for that very first one. So the very first oscillator, I'm using one of the JP saws. If you know your synthesizers, that's probably from a Roland Jupiter. Is where that waveform probably came from. So on the first page, this is where we can dial in things like the pitch of this oscillator. We can detune it versus other oscillators. We can even change things like the key follow or the key scaling. So for example, and I'll switch cameras views here real quick. For example, if you set this to a negative value, you'll see that as I play on the top of the keyboard, it's very low. And as I move to the base of the top or the bottom of the keyboard, the note's very high. So you can do some cool things with reverse key scaling to get some different effects. A common kind of Joe Zawinul effect if you're looking for something like that. So lots of flexibility there. There is also an envelope here in the oscillator section, and this particular one is the pitch envelope, and that's a way to have your sound change in pitch over time. So if you're going for a specific kind of effect, you could, as example, turn this envelope on by adding some depth and go in here and have the pitch of that oscillator change over a period of time. So as I strike the key, it's going to go up to that level, and then it's going to work its way down the rest of the envelope. We have a decay, which will go to the next stage, and then all the way back down to the sustain level. So you can have this note travel in pitch over a period of time. I'm going to exit back out and set that back to 0. So we have other things here like LFO depth that would determine the amount of vibrato. In this case, the vibrato is triggered by the mod wheel, and a few other things like pulse width. But that's a quick tour of the basic oscillator. Now, one cool thing about, like I said, on the XW series is that you can combine multiple oscillators. So if I turn on this second oscillator, that's where things quickly begin to get interesting. I can start with a similar waveform and tune it differently. Oops, hang on one second, I'm not hearing it. Second oscillator is on, first oscillator is on, and let's see what Mike is doing wrong here. And I'm not hearing it at all, so just 1 second. There it is, sorry. Okay, so you can tune these oscillators separately from each other. What you guys didn't see, I guess, in that camera view is that I didn't have the volume of that particular part turned up all the way. So I'm going to switch views here a little bit so you get a little bit more idea of what I'm doing. So we can change the pitch, and that's one of the first things that's going to make this sound interesting. Is to dial them in at a different pitch. So I can put them an octave apart. I use the data wheel. One of the questions online is can you set parameter depths by the numeric pad? No, you do it from the data wheel. Spin the wheel. It's really the fastest way if you need to dial something in. I'll double check. Nope, that's the only way to do it is the data wheel or the plus and minus buttons. So traditionally the instrument's kind of set up in MIDI values in that values of, if I go back here to the pitch screen so you guys can see it, values of 127 will give me an octave. Okay. There's also a detuning thing there below, so you can have those two oscillators detuned against each other. Set them a nice distance apart. So, and real quickly, we've got a sound with some nice pizzazz. And we can continue to do this. I go to the third oscillator, turn it on, turn up its volume, and we can go in and tune it. So you can see in just a matter of moments we can dial in something really, really cool. There's a total of 5 oscillators on the XW-P1 and G1 that are generated from the keyboard itself. If you read the specs online, it says 6 oscillator solo synth, and that 6th oscillator is for the external input. Now, there's a mic input, there's a line input on the back, and with that external input, that allows you to take other signals and run them back in. The most typical application for me is using the XW in combination with an iPad application or another instrument that is MIDI'd up. So I've typically used it with an iPad app where I've taken the output of the iPad and run it back in. And that's just another, in addition to the the hundreds of waveforms that are on board, another way that you can add dynamics and expression to those sounds by just mixing yet another sound source in. One thing that's I don't want you to forget about sounds like this. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the 4th oscillator here. Turn it on. Turn up my volume here. And so the 4th one here, I'm going to put up a 5th. Okay. So you can do some cool things where, in this case, I'm going to exit back out. Let me show you the screen here. I'm going to scroll out and actually set this oscillator. It has its own amp envelope, and I can actually have that that one layer fade in a little bit later. So I can set an attack time for that extra note, and you hear it fade in after just a moment. So I'm going to make it a little bit louder, turn the volume up all the way, and I'm also going to change the effect that's being used here to something cool like the distortion. So when we have an effect like the distortion, when that extra note fades in, it really adds a lot of animation, kind of like a guitar feeding back. You hear it fade in. So there's a lot of cool ways to create some very unique sounds. So another type of sound that actually I'll be uploading immediately after, well, actually, excuse me, I uploaded it earlier today, is a kind of rather famous instrument sound from the Roland TB-303. And if you ever do any research on this instrument, it was something that Roland came out with originally as an instrument to replace a bass player. And it kind of failed at that, but it quickly gained popularity with the dance music crowd back in the late 80s, I believe. So if you take a look inside the XW, go back into a basic sound, you'll see that there are actual oscillators or samples that were taken from that instrument, and that way you can utilize the tools that the XW has to get a pretty darn accurate TB sound. And here's kind of the basic raw sound that you get out of the sample that we have in here. And the first thing that I did, go into oscillator 1, is I did put a little bit of an envelope on this. It's actually a filter envelope that's closing after the initial key strike. So I'm going to put the screen on here. Envelope depth. So you hear the sound starts out a little bright and then it closes. And that's kind of that envelope is a little bit of the part of the signature of the TB. And I'm with my left hand, I lowered the cutoff frequency of the filter a little bit. So I have an envelope here on the filter where it starts at a particular level and then it's dropping down to a lower closed level. And that gives me the sound that closes over time. So one of the cool things we get with this sound is when we start turning up things like the resonance. With just that basic total filter on there, we can get a very characteristic sound of the TB. So I can actually go in here, I'm going to make this filter a little bit faster, change my depth, and change that attack time. So we've got a really, just pretty quickly by dialing in that waveform, making an adjustment to the total filter, we've got a pretty classic TB type sound. The other kind of thing that really makes this sound is actually the way the unit distorted. And cool thing is our DSP effect on here can do a pretty darn good job of getting nice and overdriven. So it's quickly convincing TB303 type sound. The other thing I did on this preset, and again, it's something you can download on the Casio music forums. I did upload it this morning, and I will be making some minor changes to it. And yes, this sound works on both the XW-P1 and G1. Everything we've talked about so far in this video is in common with both instruments. So that waveform, it's the same number in both instruments. On the solo synth oscillator, it's oscillator number 269, gives you one of those TB waveforms. And I actually have a second one on the pulse wave dialed in on the second oscillator, which is currently turned off. But you really get to a really nice, accurate TB sound. The other little bit of detail I added to this sound was portamento. And if you've ever heard a TB303, the slide is one of the other characteristic sounds or elements to it. So you have the a really nice gritty filter, some distortion, and a slide. So in this case, I have assigned the portamento time to the mod wheel, so it was easy to change in a performance situation. And I'll just show you quickly how I did that. It's something called a virtual controller. And this is an element on the XW that allows us to assign controllers to specific parameters. And I believe I used controller just number 8 here. So what I did, I chose my modulation wheel as my source. I set a depth, and for my destination, I chose all oscillators. And I can choose a parameter within those. So I can choose things like different filter and amps parameters and things like that. But what I want to control in this case is just portamento time. So sorry, I accidentally exited away. So the depth value you set here, if I push the mod wheel up, it's going to take a very, very long time to get up and down. So you got to find a depth value that works for the type of effect that you're working for. And I like it a little bit slower. Excuse me, I want it at a lower value, a little bit faster. So that's a new sound that we just posted. Pretty darn accurate emulation of a 303, and again, if that's a sound you're after, it's a very desirable instrument. I looked on eBay today; they're selling for $2,000. And think about it, it's the TB303 is an instrument that has a solo synth and a step sequencer. That's all it does, and it's $2,000. So think about with a product like either one of the XWs here, we have a solo synth and a step sequencer, and it's a pretty cool way, pretty amazing thing about the XW that we're delivering so much value in this product. So speaking of the step sequencer, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and get into the step sequencer. And for this example, I'm going to start with a completely blank template. I'll be starting basically at the same spot that you guys start out when you're sitting in front of your XW, so nothing is canned or prepared in advance in this case. So this will give you a little bit of the idea of the workflow that I would do when I sit down to make a step sequence, and eventually save that as a performance on the XW-P1 or G1. So this part works exactly the same. Question online: can it core an Apple? No, it can't. Unfortunately, it can't. All right, so I'm going to switch. Hopefully this view, I'm going to be just over here in the corner. You'll see my hands when I'm playing the keyboard. I'm going to go to the step sequencer here, and I'm going to a completely empty step sequence. You see that I'm in the user bank up here. The U, I'm in bank 4, number 3. It's completely empty. Keep in mind, if something has been recorded there next to the U, you see a little asterisk there. That means there is information stored there. So if you did not take the time to name it, the step sequence will have an asterisk there if something is saved there but not named. So always keep in mind, there's 100 step sequence locations available for you. You got to keep good track of your work. You got to save often, all those kinds of things. So I'm going to show you quickly how to put together a step sequence on the XW-P1. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm hitting the start button here, and over on the left hand side of the screen you can see that the step sequencer is running with little blinking lights, and those lights correspond to 16 steps on a grid. That can be and I'll lean, oops, I guess I'd have to lean way forward to see you guys this way. Those 16 steps on the grid, basically those can be 16th notes, and that's the way they are by default, but they could be quarter notes, eighth notes, they can be triplets, you can add swing, and we'll get into some of those elements in a moment. But by default on a blank sequence, when you hit start, you've got a basic 16th note sequence running down here in the bottom. So I'll adjust this camera a little bit so you can see the sequence running here. On the top, on the display, underneath where it says Untitled, it says PT: drum 1. So that tells me that I'm on track 1, labeled in this case drum 1. And the first 5 tracks by default are drums. There are, however, no rules on the XW. You can change all of that later on. But by default, drum 1 will give you a kick drum, and I'll just by pressing a note here, or pressing a button over here on the grid, I've got a basic 4 on the floor. The first question that always comes up is, okay, well, that's cool, but how do I change from this acoustic kick drum sound to something else? And to do that, I have to move this camera a little bit. The mixer button, just below the display. So if we press the mixer button, that will take us, I apologize, the exposure changed on the camera a little bit. There it goes. That takes us to the part in the mixer where this kick drum is playing. And you see we just have a regular standard kit. So we can go in and dial in a drum kit that has, a kick drum that we're looking for. This particular groove set is one of the sounds that's in the XW. G1, not in the P1. So I got a little kick drum. So I'm going to exit out of the mixer. I'm back to my step sequence, and just to the, you can see on the bottom left of the screen, you see my finger here. There's 2 buttons over here labeled part plus and minus. So I don't have to stop the sequencer. While it's running, I can hit part plus, and you see the screen changes up on the top, and now it says drum 2. And by default, drum 2 is a snare, and everything I'm talking about is in common with the P1 and G1. Okay, so I'll get to a point tonight when I'm talking about something that is different on the G1. But currently the step sequencer operates exactly the same. So I've got a kick drum and a snare, and again I can press the mixer button. It takes me immediately to that part where my snare is, and I can dial in. Actually, kind of like that one. And I've got a snare sound. I can go to track 3 very quickly. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways to put in parts. You can use the buttons here. You can use the sliders. So that's one cool thing about the step sequencers. You can input notes using the sliders. So when I move a slider, you see that the lights are lighting up. And if I move to the next row, there's the button over here to the left of the sliders. I'm now controlling the second group of 8. So real quickly, using the switches and the sliders, I can put together a part that's very cool. I'm going to change that hi-hat sound to, I like some of the electronic sounds. So Happy Rat's got a question here on the live stream. Can you have the step sequence with a pattern and voices and MIDI and then save to a performance? So absolutely. The rule of thumb when you're dealing with the XW is that the sounds that you're using on all of these tracks are stored as part of the step sequence. So later when I get to my performance and I want to have sounds that I'm playing live on the keyboard on top of all of this, that's going to be zones 1 through 4 or MIDI channels 1 through 4. The performance really only controls those 4 zones. So all of the sounds that I'm working on right here in this basic basic sequence is part of the step sequence. So it's a good time as any to hit the right button and save this. There are a couple different ways to save or to name things here on the XW. And by the way, remember earlier I told you if there's an asterisk on the number there on the screen, that means something's already there. So I'm on an empty location number, and now I can use the data wheel to name this. I can also use the number pad over on the far right hand side, and I don't have a camera angle specifically to cover, but the digits 0 through 9, it's if you have if you remember early days of texting on a cell phone, you can actually use those buttons here, and it will cycle through the letters and type my name in there if I can remember how to do it. So the preset user button is a space. So anyway, I just put my name in there and I'm saving the step sequence. So those 3 sounds, the step sequence that I have so far, that's stored right now. I'm going to take a quick look at the form. How many zones do you use realistically in a realistic performance? And typically, sorry, I got to move my window here. What channels would you assign to zones, assuming you reserve 1 channel for hex or synth? That's a very broad question. So yes, on the XW-G1 and P1, your first zone in a performance is going to be your solo synth. Here I still have that that TB sound is still dialed in. But it completely depends on musically what you're trying to do. If I'm doing something that's kind of an acid house thing with this TB sound, I may only use 1 or 2. So I might have just zone 1's going to be my TB, and I might have a pad or another comping sound on the top half of the keyboard. So it does take a little bit of planning. But it's quite capable as a performance keyboard. And don't forget, in performance mode, those zones can also trigger external instruments. So you can assign a zone to go out to the MIDI out or the USB out and control another piece of equipment. So a couple other tricks while I've got this kind of basic sequence going here. I mentioned earlier. And I'm just going to go ahead and put hi-hats on all 16 steps here. I mentioned earlier that different tracks can have different note values. So if I press the edit button for my step sequence, we're taken to a couple. This is the step sequence editor, and we're looking at in this case, the track parameter section. Lets me determine what note value this track has. So see at the top of the screen it says D3 up here. That means I'm on drum track 3. I can choose how many steps. It could be 2 steps, 1 step in my sequence. Below that I can choose what note value. So you can see if I set it to 8th note triplets, we get something like that. If I set it to 30-second notes, pretty self-explanatory. So each track is completely independent, and so setting up something like this on the hi-hat doesn't change what's going on with my other parts. So I'm going to leave it here at 30-second notes here for a second. If I were to slow the tempo way down, you might want a 30-second note hi-hat if you're doing more of a dubstep, vibe. Okay, so now we've got something a little bit more like that. Okay, so and then you could dial in another sound on top. In fact, I'm going to get a little sidetracked from the TB thing that I was doing, and let's go down this road for a moment on the sort of the dubstep vibe. So we've built this sequence. Not very complicated at this point, but we can take this sequence and duplicate it. So we're going to make a subtle variation on this sequence. If I hit the edit button again and I scroll down, I can copy this entire sequence. In fact, I can copy an individual track or part, but I can also take this pattern and copy it from what looks like I was working on pattern 3. I'm going to just copy it to pattern 2. So the buttons to the underneath the screen. Ooh, what did I do wrong? Uh-oh, I may have made an error. Okay, sorry. I did record my pattern on pattern 1. So let's do that copy function one more time. I apologize, the screen, there we go, it takes a moment. Alright, so I'm going to copy my pattern from pattern 1 to pattern 2. So I don't have to redo all of those parts. So as you can see, if I switch between pattern 1 and pattern 2, it's doing exactly the same thing. So I'm going to do something different on pattern 2 now that I've made that copy. I'm going to set, go back to my kick drum part, which, by the way, if you hit your part plus and minus buttons down here at the same time, it will take you to part 1. So you don't have to hit the minus button multiple times to get to part 1. So I'm going to go to my my kick drum part, and I'm going to set it to 30-second notes, just to do something a little different here. And I'm also going to go over here and light up every single button on my kick drum part. Okay, so now I've got something that's kind of like a little fill. So here's my regular pattern on pattern 1. I go to pattern 2 and back and forth. The step sequence can be set to work 2 different ways. To the right of the display, there's a menu button. This is where I could save this individual step sequence. But there's also some settings for this step sequence. And there's a parameter that is it's usually by default set to wait. I was playing with this earlier, so I did change it to real time. If it's set to wait, the step sequencer is going to wait to the next measure downbeat. I can also set it to real time, which means the step sequence will switch between different patterns as fast as I can press the buttons. And third, you can see there's a selection there where I can choose beat. So that'll give you an idea. Let's leave it on beat for a minute. So I've got my pattern here. Okay, so if I switch back and forth between patterns 1 and 2, it's happening exactly on the beat. If I go back here to settings and I change this to sorry, my camera. Set it to real time. That will allow us to, again, in real time, to get some cooler variations. So one of the questions we get with the XWs is that, is there a stutter button? Is there something, that will let me do some unique musical things with a pattern? Well, there isn't a direct stutter button, but just by changing the note values of a pattern, I can create something really cool that I can trigger and manipulate in real time. So I'm going to take a quick look at the questions online. So let's see. Can I mix different step numbers for different parts of a sequence? Step numbers. If I'm following you correctly, if I understand the question correctly, the hi-hat part, each one of the patterns can have a different note value. So, in the case of the kick drum, it's doing 16th notes, and when I go to the other part, it's doing 32nd notes. So each track is independent, and each pattern is also independent. So it's extremely flexible. The other question online is about chains. So up to now, I've been manipulating these patterns manually here on the front of the XW-G1. We do have a chain feature that allows you to specify a series of events, and you basically say, I want this pattern to go so many times for 4 measures, and then go to the next pattern and then back. So you can build a chain. The question is, can you save the chain as a performance? Currently, no. And I say currently, it's been on my wish list for quite a while. That doesn't mean that there's going to be a software update. I can't promise those, but I would like, I would hope that soon we'd get something like that that added to the product. So my fingers are crossed. I can't promise anything, but currently, no. You would have to, once you call up a performance, you would have to manually select the chain. So so that gives you a little bit of an idea with those with the sequence how that might work. Hang on. And guess what? Because I didn't save my step sequence before creating a chain, my pattern has changed. So unfortunately, I lost those changes. So remember to save often. The step sequencer part, if you ever leave the step sequencer section, change your performance, something like that, you can potentially, as I just did, lose part of your track. So okay, so just kind of getting it back to kind of the way it was. So with this kind of almost dubstep kind of feel, I just wanted to show you real quick that as far as new sounds, people keep asking. There are some other sounds in the works. We do have some really cool. Someone's asking online, can you make it sound like a sick, wet fart? This is about as close as I can come, at least right this moment. So anyway, we can do stylistically a lot of different things. So something like this this dubstep style is pretty easy. A sound like this in a step sequence like this, there's one other change that I might make in my performance. So my performance is controlling this configuration. So one thing I might do is take this zone and change the bend range from its default of 2 steps to the bend range down to 2 octaves. So if I use, and I'll just move the camera here a little bit, if I use the pitch wheel, which is controlling, or the modulation wheel, which is controlling that filter, and the pitch wheel, doing that 2 octave bend, if I use the 2 of those at the same time, So that's sort of one way to perform that that sort of characteristic wobble bass type sound. So back to the questions online. There's a question about zones overlapping. Can you layer piano strings? Yes. On both the P1 and the G1, all 4 zones can be overlapped. Each zone has a low key range, a high key range, and using the part plus and minus buttons, I can switch between zones. And you see I have independent key ranges for each of them. They have volume, pan position, octave shifting, all transposition. All of that stuff is here, all on one screen for each zone. One difference from the PX5S, which some of you here on the live stream have, is that I can't do velocity switching between zones. So that's one improvement that was made on the PX5S. You could potentially, on the XW-P1 within a hex layer, you could do velocity switches between each of those layers. So take a quick look at some of the questions online, and I really appreciate you guys asking questions on the forum online. This is the kind of thing that we're doing quite often right now. We did a PX5S clinic last month. This month we're doing XW. We'll probably do another PX5 clinic soon. So we're going to keep on doing these types of things, and when these are done, we'll be posting them to YouTube. Can you control volumes of each zone during a performance? Physically, there is not a way to do that live. The sliders on each model do work a little bit differently. On the XW-G1, the model we have here, the sliders over here are dedicated to doing one of two things. The sliders either manipulate parameters in our solo synth, or they manipulate parts in the step sequencer, like we were doing before with the hi-hat part, changing note numbers. So there's no way to assign the sliders to do anything other than that. On the P1, it's a little bit different. The sliders can control either the solo synth volume of each of the solo synth oscillators. They can control volumes of each of the hex layer components, or there's also a drawbar organ mode. So there's switches, to the left of the keyboards that determine physically what those sliders are going to do below. I will tell you, on the XW-G1, the knobs are a little bit, the function of the knobs are a little bit different, and in fact, I'm going to actually make a change to my answer, because I believe that through something called an NRPN, we can actually change each of these knobs to be volumes for each of the zones, so if you wanted to control them in real time. So I'm in performance mode. Take a look at the screen here. I'll just see if I don't know the exact NRPN number, which is it's a part of the, I'd have to look it up in the SysX chart, but I tell you what, I'm going to look it up and I'll post it on the Casio music forums in the XW section, the answer to this question. So in performance, in the controller section, you can see this is where I can assign any of my knobs to be different things. I believe up here at the top of the list, something called NRPN, I believe I can go in and using the appropriate numbers from our system exclusive chart, that I could change that to zone volume. So I'm pretty positive that is possible. But check back at Casio music forums for a little follow-up on that one. So good question. You did stump me, and that's fine. That's part of this. I said at the beginning that I was going to try and show you guys, things from scratch without really preparing too much in advance. I did have a couple preset tones loaded in the solo synth, but other than that, I'm starting with blank sequences and showing you basically, exactly how you guys would do it. So another thing I want to show you guys real quick is with the XW-G1, it does have the ability to load in sampled sounds. And one of the things, again, also just happened over at the forums at CasioMusicForums.com, is that we started loading up drum samples. So there's some things up there to explore in the download section. So there's some classic drum machine sounds. We kind of have some 808 type sounds in the machine already. These perhaps are a little more authentic. If you're looking for some really aggressive stuff, I loaded in a set of 5 different kick drums last night. So when you load in samples, basically you get 1 sample per octave. So across the range of the keyboard, you can have 1 sample in each octave. Now, one thing that changed recently on the XW-G1 is the data editor was updated. So if you're an XW-G1 owner and you haven't checked out the update, do download the update to the data editor, because instead of being able to load in 10 samples, like 10 kick drums, you can now load in 50. They actually added some flexibility to the engine there, so you can load 10 sets of 5 samples into the XW-G1, so you can get some different kinds of sounds. So we get some really cool new drum kits that are being loaded up. This is one that's sort of in progress that has some cool noises and effects. So that's a little bit about the sampler. And so those sounds can be loaded in a couple different ways. You can once you download them off the website, you can put them on the SD card and load them in from a normal SD card. You could also, using the data editor, drag them and drop them from your computer over to a location on the XW, and sometimes the samples, it takes a few seconds to move the sampled sounds over, but that's actually the easiest way to get a handle on the file management and everything that's happening in the machine at once. So I'm going to take a quick look at again the Ustream chat that we've got going on here and see if there's any questions here. So the questions about the DSP effects on the XW. The effects on the XW series are actually pretty straightforward, in that there's first of all there's a system reverb effect that within the mixer section. I'll go to the screen here. Any of your tracks can send to that master reverb, and there's also a global chorus send. The XW series, however, has one insert effect, and if the insert effect is in use, such as a distortion or a delay effect or something like that, the chorus effect is disabled. So I hope that clarifies that question about the effects. I'd honestly, myself, 9 times out of 10, I'm using the DSP effect, and that means that I'm not going to get chorus on my part. So there are some limitations. They have crammed in a lot in this machine. So again, back at the Ustream chat here, what button brought up the effects menu? I just pressed the mixer button right here. Okay, so I've gone to that several times throughout the demo tonight. Anytime I was in the step sequencer or anything like that, if I hit the mixer button, that takes me to my active part and lets me make all kinds of changes. So I can choose the drum kit that's being used. I can set its volume, its pan position, its tuning, its pitch bend range, and its effects mix. One thing I really like about this, the way the mixer works, let me just find a different sequence here. So got a basic. This is just a variation on one of the factory sequences here. I'm going to turn that part off for a moment. All right. So I've got a basic part here. As you heard, I had another part kind of being triggering there. So if I go to the mixer, and keep in mind, I've got a sound that I'm playing live on the keyboard. So maybe I want to change the mix of everything. If I press the mixer button, again, I can use these part plus and minus buttons to move between all of my different tracks. If I go all the way to track 1, part 1, and go left one more time, notice it says all. So one cool thing that can happen is I can adjust the volume of all the tracks and it keeps their relative levels. So I can lower my drums and then I can go and increase the level of my lead sound on part 1. So it's really cool that I can make a group adjustment to all of those parts, and then make sure that my lead sound is as loud in the mix as I need it to be. Okay. Time-wise, we've got just a few more minutes in this particular demo tonight. I'm going to show you one more thing on the step sequencer, and this is another common question. I don't believe it's been addressed in another video, so I want to make sure that this this gets covered. The common question is, I got a sequence such as this one, and I want to use the solo synth as my bass sound. I want to use I want to use the solo synth instead of playing it live. I want to use that sound as a part in the step sequence. It absolutely can be done. We talked early in the clinic about that TB303 type of sound. So we'll dial in one of those. So if I want to use this sound as one of my parts in my sequence, I'm going to go press my step sequence button to the left of the display, and then over to the right, and I'm sorry my camera angle doesn't get over there, there's a menu button over to the right of the display, and I scroll down, there's some settings for my step sequence. So this is a little bit confusing the way it's written. It says solo 1 channel 14. So if we go back to the step sequencer and look at the way our parts or tracks in the step sequencer are labeled, we have drums 1 through 5, 4, 5. We have a bass part. We have a solo 1, solo 2, and a chord track. The solo 1 track means that this is a track that can record one note at a time, kind of like a drum track. By default, in fact, in this sequence, it's doing some of those little bleeping sounds there in the background. It's not a chordal part. It's a track for an individual note. So you can swap this track, which by default is MIDI channel 14 in our mixer, to instead go back to that menu button, change my settings, change the solo channel to MIDI channel 1. All right, so that means that anything sequenced on this part in the step sequencer is going to be my lead sound. All right, so and while we're here, I'm going to show you how I would record something like this in real time to the step sequencer. Because by default, you know, I'm playing the keyboard live over the step sequence. That isn't recording it into the track. So while the step sequence is running, the way to do it is to press the edit button to the left of the screen and put the step sequencer in step edit mode. All right. So while it's in step edit mode, all I need to do is play. I've sequenced that part. The other common question we get is, while that's running, that's the sort of TB303 manipulated sound that you might want live. So of course live, I can turn this knob and maybe even play another sound in with my right hand on the keyboard. But if you want, you can also automate these changes. So there are 2 tracks on the step sequencer that we have yet to talk about. So let's go back again to our step sequencer. We have drum 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bass, solo 1, 2, chord, and then there's 2 tracks labeled controller 1 and controller 2. So these tracks allow you to enter filter changes, panning changes, those kinds of things into a track. So to do that, first thing you have to do is choose, well, what is that? What's it going to modulate? Is it going to be filter? What's it going to be? So I'm going to go down to, I have my controller track selected. I'm going to hit Edit and go to Track Parameter. And here I'm going to choose what channel in my 16-channel mixer am I manipulating, and that bass sound, that TB sound, is channel 1. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do, and I didn't need to exit there, is I'm going to go to step edit mode. And here on the screen, and I do recommend setting this up so when the sequencer is not running, I can now go through here and choose what parameter that I want to manipulate. So my filter is selected. Okay, so at this point, it's the sliders that allow me to manipulate what we're seeing on the screen. So for example, if I move the first slider up, you can see it represented on the screen. And now I'm manipulating the filter for all of these different steps. And now I can press there's a button down here to move it to the second row of sliders or the second row of digits, and now manipulate parts. And there we go. So we could set up, controller track 2 to be something like, and this is fun, pan position. And again, I have to assign this to a particular channel, which it's set to channel 1. That's good. And now, again, using those sliders, I can manipulate this part in stereo. So that's really quickly how you can add some automation to um, an otherwise static part. There's a question online about controller tracks. Oh, you know what? There are 4. Excuse me. That was a verbal typo. There are a total of 4 controller tracks on both the XW-P1 and G1. So, so a really cool way to to make your hi-hats bounce back and forth in the stereo field, to add some automation. Don't forget to save often. Before you go back to performance mode and make changes to what's happening live on the keyboard, do save that step sequence. That way you're keeping everything you've done so far. Which, by the way, that step sequence, you could have the step sequence manipulating your part while you're playing it. So you could have filter changes happening to a lead sound while you're playing it with the step sequencer. Or with the phrase sequencer. And we're going to run out a little bit of time to talk about the phrase sequencer tonight, but I do want to mention something that I like to do with the arpeggiator. Someone asked if there's any questions about that, and I just want to show something that I do often with the step sequencer. So the arpeggiator. If you read any of the reviews of the XW series online or in magazines, I believe it might have been over on gearsluts.com. Somebody said, the arpeggiator in the XW series is, the best one that's ever been put into a keyboard. I agree. It is incredibly slick, very powerful, and programmable. And the 100 patterns that are in here only begin to scratch the surface. The cool thing is that there's room for 100 of your own. Usually when I'm playing the XW series, one of the things that I find is, and I get a kick every time I read that it's screwed up. One thing that I find is that I prefer arpeggios that are different note values. So one thing that I often do, you can take an arpeggio such as this, and I'll just hit the edit button. And notice this kind of looks similar to what we were dealing with over on the step sequencer side. There's a parameter page where I can choose how many steps are in this step sequence, and I can choose my note value. So when I have a sound that is tempo synced, or that has a tempo sync delay, we can quickly get something that is really, really nice and musical. And just to show you how I did this in this lead sound, this, by the way, is the basic lead sound that we started the clinic out with. In DSP Edit, under Delay, there's a section for tempo sync. So by default, you'll find that off. The setting of 3/4 will actually give me a dotted 8th note. So it's give me this kind of cool sound. So if I'm manipulating the filter, okay, so there's a lot of ways to make a very simple change to an arpeggio pattern and get something that's very different. So there's so much to explore on the XW series that we continue just to uncover layers over the last year. So lots more sounds coming. For anybody that's watching on YouTube, please do check the download section over on CasioMusicForums.com. That's where we're posting sounds. I believe we're up to, Alan Kay will correct me if I'm wrong, but we're over a dozen now. There are actually some sounds that we previously posted that aren't on the download section of the forum over on our XW blog, which is xwsynth.wordpress.com. There are some other hex layer sounds for the XWP1 and some lead sounds that I haven't moved all of those over to the forums yet. So do check those out. One last thing I'm going to show you guys really quick is something that we teased about a little while ago, is regarding an iPad application. We are working with the guys over at MIDI Designer, and they've got a really cool app. It's called MIDI Designer, and I highly recommend the app. It's useful not only for products such as these, but other MIDI products in your computer music studio. So if you have an iPad, it is something to explore. And when I started looking into the app and I started digging under the hood of the XW, I realized that this application could allow us to manipulate sounds in the XW series in ways that, well, if I'm playing the keyboard and I only have one hand, it's extremely difficult to do any other way. So I'm going to move this one camera over here, just hopefully so you can get a quick look at what's going on with this app. Oh, don't know if that will reach. Actually, what I'll do is I'm just going to hold the iPad right here for a moment. So what we've got going on is an application that allows us to manipulate actually every parameter in the XW-P1 or G1 on this touchscreen surface. One of the things, I was just playing this little arpeggiated part, so is that I can manipulate my filter and resonance at the same time. And when we start adding other parts in here, so you can see that, sorry, I'm hitting buttons with the back of the iPad. The reason I wanted to show you this is, this is something that I'm working with now, and we're using it. As you can see, I was able to very quickly create a really cool, unique sound using the touchscreen. This is what I'm using to make sounds. It's extremely fast, and this is an application that you can go buy now, and with a little bit of practice, you can start adding controllers for your musical gear. This layout that we're using from MIDI Designer, we will release. So if you buy the MIDI Designer Pro app, even their free version, you'll be able to use this layout and control your XW if you have an iPad. We are working with one with them to create one that is fixed in this design for the XW to keep it simpler for you guys too. And that will probably, both of those things will probably be coming in towards the end of September, early October. So I think it's pretty exciting for me. It has allowed me, like I said, to get some new, fresh sounds out of it that otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do with, I could have done from the front panel, but the speed of this is pretty cool. Windows 8, don't know, obviously all the touchscreen Windows 8 tablets are just coming out. The beauty of what MIDI Designer has done is they've created an application that is open for all kinds of things. And if you want to create an XY pad to manipulate something, well, you basically draw it. You choose the type of controller that you want and what you want it to do. If a tool that is open like this comes out on Windows 8, we'll certainly we'll certainly look at developing something like that. Currently no plans. Obviously we do have our Mac and PC editors, and right now, other than Windows 8 and iPad, the Android tablets don't support MIDI, so it's not possible on those platforms right now. But this is something I'm really excited about. This is going to lead, for you guys that aren't into programming, lead to a lot more sounds available for downloading. And for those of you that do tweak, you can you'll be able to use this layout. So it's going to come in two ways. You'll be able to put if you have MIDI Designer Pro, you'll be able to load this layout in, but there will also, we're working with MIDI Designer. They're going to just release this layout in a dedicated app for the XW. So towards the end of October, or end of September, early October. So that is it for tonight. I really do appreciate the questions and the attention, everything tonight. Like I said, this is something we're going to do as often as we can. We might rotate each month between the PX5S and the XW-P1. Quick question from Joe online: are we going to expand our synth line? Joe, I can't talk about what we're going to do next, but I certainly hope so. And if you haven't seen the PX5S, of course it's an 88-note stage piano, but it's also a remarkable synthesizer as well. Similar in some respects to the XW, but it goes into some of its own complete unique territory as well. So sonically, it is a different piece. It's its own unique piece. So do check that out. It's more than just a piano. I hope the clinic helped for you guys tonight. I do appreciate the questions and the participation, and I look forward to seeing you guys here on the next clinic from Casio. I'm Mike Martin. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Thanks.